So my work with Ava primarily has to do with a few main points, which I will go over now. Ava's story has been most famously told in the last 800 years or so, or more, depending on where you want to measure after the death of Christ and the birth of early Christianity. Her story has been told in one way, and basically it talks about her capture by a misguiding and even malicious force represented in the archangel. Her story over the last millions of years in human history has been primarily lost in terms of the oral traditions of the ancient ones, and when she was understood as the mother, the Holy Mother, rather than, hence the symbolism and the ancient motif of the Black Madonna, that she is the Holy One, and instead, and it's still these recordings and these understandings as her as the Holy One, the Ancient One, still exists in radiant parts of North America and the world, especially the non-Western world. But primarily it was lost. Primarily it was annihilated through unspeakable brutality, both physically and psychological. Now, I never want to make this about, for lack of a better word, shitting on Christianity. I have a very deep love for the Christian tradition and faith. I've met Christians from all over the world, from many different sects of Christianity, and I have a very deep love for the Christian faith, in particular, actually, the Catholic faith. And as I said before, that one of the prominent destructive habits of postmodernism is to actually repeat the mistakes of European ancestors, the annihilation of the ancient ones, of the old stories, of the goddess religions, of the recognition of the Black Madonna, of Ava, was an annihilation process, an amputation process. The Inquisition did what they did in the name of purification, and in a lot of ways, in a lot of psychologically, but also physically, horrific ways in the last 40, 50 years, around the 1960s, the sexual revolution, the hippie era. There's been this amputation again, a process of first we amputated, like 800 years ago, we amputated what was considered impure, right? It was considered dirty. And then now we're going to amputate again. We're going to amputate our culture again. And so there's this constant hemorrhaging that happens within the Western habits, Western cycles over the last over 800 years from the start of the Inquisition, the rise of the Catholic Church. And so my point being that, in order for us to I shouldn't just say efficiently, but in order for us to powerfully and efficiently and intuitively and soulfully and physically move forward as a humanity. And in particular, I speak of North America. If we're going to move forward, then the recognition of the original indigenous soul, indigenous spirit, needs rebirth. And rebirth doesn't happen through an unnecessary amputation process. Purification doesn't happen through a one-time amputation process. Oh, I think this is wrong. I think this is intolerant. I think that this is dirty. I think this is a backward way of looking at things, so I'm just going to amputate it. I'm just going to cut it off. That purification doesn't happen that way. Purification is not a one-time deal. Purification is a cyclical thing through the life, death, rebirth force that lives in the original feminine. And so, many Western millennials and Western people since sort of this, freeing from overly strict hundreds of years of European Christian tradition, this sort of opening up, which was a good thing, but then it became problematic because it was an amputation process rather than an integration process, rather than life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, purification process of something that has, I think that I feel so deeply connected to the Catholic tradition because in spite of being tortured and murdered and terrorized, it moves me so that the soul finds a way through these situations anyway. I'm sorry. And yeah, these horrific things happen because usually it's a few people who get deeply influenced by the predatory forces within the human psyche that are very ancient, as well as they're very ancient and have attacked the soul all the way throughout history. And yeah, these things do happen. But guess what? We have to move forward with what we have. We have to move forward with the fragments that are left to us. And the soul divinity has an immense, eternal, and deep regenerative process. And so I think I have such a deep love for the Catholic tradition because within the Catholic tradition, because it was the first Christian sort of empire to take over, it maintains a lot of the ancient motifs, including the Madonna and Child, which manifested through the biblical people of Maria or Mary and Jesus, and it contains so much of, as much as the Catholic faith says, oh, we're not pagan and we purified ourselves from the pagan. I don't know, like the rituals, the complex rituals, the beautiful poetry and the verses and catechisms and artwork, sacred artwork from all over the world that comes out of the Catholic tradition speaks so much to me of the ancient ones. And it moves me so much that, and it moves me so much that even through it all, the soul found a way. And so I would like to get in a bit, a little roll up my sleeves, get in up to my elbows a bit in some dirt, in some filth, in some shit, okay? Because that is the work of healing. We're not amputating anything, we're integrating. We are healing. If we have to amputate something, it is because the life, death, rebirth, sacred feminine says it is time. But we don't just amputate because we have this egotistical concept that is purification. Okay? So I'd like to talk about the corruption of the word Indigenous in this time, this modern time in North America, in which feelings and preferences, personal preferences and lifestyles now, well, they run government, they run education, they run social situations, they run individuals, they run everything right now. And the word Indigenous has been used recently, especially, but starting with the hippie era, Native American and Indigenous North American, motifs and ancient ritual has been used by white people, as well as Western people, as well as people of color, including Indigenous people, depending on who they are and how much pain is not processed, how much ignorance has not been resolved, has been used and abused and corrupted and twisted and basically watered down to make way for a philosophy that is separate, this amputated, that is severed from the ancestors, in which traditional values are now either isolated to a very strict European Christian concept, or they don't exist, or they're not needed. I am a traditional midwife, as I said before, and traditional midwifery is the most ancient form of midwifery. You can find more information about that at my website. On ShinKellyIntuitiveHealer.weebly.com. I will also write it in the description of this segment. But I think I'm just going to go straight to the core of the issue, where the word Indigenous is being used right now in the wake of this fanaticism surrounding feelings and personal preferences and lifestyles and identities. It is being used to propagate these philosophies, these fanatical philosophies surrounding the prioritization of emotions and personal preferences, basically. And what I mean by that is that somehow, I am told by Facebook, by people, by, whatever, online, YouTube videos, whatever, I'm told that Indigenous now means, Indigenous identity now means that traditional values, and basically the sacred feminine is now optional. Okay, it's optional. It's very weird because the postmodernism that drives prioritization of emotions, feelings, personal preferences, over traditional values in the best sense, in the most ancient sense. It is westernization, and it comes out of Western liberal philosophies. It is not sort of fanatical liberal philosophies. It is not rooted in anything. It's not even rooted in the last 800 years. In the last 800 years of European tradition and culture, it's not rooted in anything. It literally has come out of this drive in postmodernism of basically, people being too comfortable, and in indigenous people. When I say indigenous people, and I'm going to talk about this more, okay, I don't just mean Native American or Native North American. Even I do mean them, but I also mean indigenous. The indigenous has a couple of layers, and I can say this with some authority because I am indigenous. I am Korean and Japanese, and we are very indigenous people. Our cultures span as a united kingdoms or empires, depending on where and how you look at it, but the span, 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 years. It really depends on where you measure. If you're going to measure from tribal culture, more than that, much more than that. And so that's one layer of it. Genetically, I am Japanese and Korean, right? I grew up in my culture. But the other layer is that, if you're going to just use biology, everyone is indigenous. Everyone comes from someplace, an indigenous place, right? My husband is, indigenous of Ireland. He's third generation American, I think, at least on one side, but a few generations American. But genetically he is indigenous. Okay, if a German person's indigenous to Germany, if they're genetically from the European tribes. Okay, so yeah, everyone's indigenous. Okay, but there's another layer to it, and I do think it's important. Actually, I do know it's important. It's important because identity goes beyond your genetics too. Although there has been in this era of prioritization of feelings and emotions and preferences, people say that genetics have no place at all, but no. So it's both, and but my husband, for example, he comes originally from an indigenous Irish tradition, right? Originally, this is before, pre-European colonization, pre-Inquisition, right? But that was annihilated. Okay, that was annihilated. That was forbidden, and so a new culture sprung up. But my husband has told me himself that and I think things are growing more. I think that things are changing more with this because we talk a lot about it. But he threw away the adopted culture. The last 800 years of culture, too. So he literally severed himself from anything that could connect him, any fragment that could connect him, that could clue him into the ancestors, into a cultural indigenous identity. So in that sense, and I think a lot of traditional healers in the realest, most deep, most ancient sense would not consider him indigenous, okay? In that, to have an indigenous identity. But I do. I grew up in my culture. There is a deep, rich. There's a deep and rich continuity of culture and communication, communing and understanding of the ancestors who are the root, who are the gateway, one of the great gateways to your identity. So as a midwife, traditional midwife, and working with other traditional midwives from other cultures, I've come across, and as well as Western cultures, I have come across this term, pregnant people. What? What? Pregnant people. Because supposedly it is offensive to men, to males, and to women, to females who feel like the other sex, the other gender. Okay? Offensive. Okay. All right. And the word indigenous has now been slapped onto or hitched onto this insanity. Okay? People who have an issue with the sex that they are, okay? Man or woman, they make up a tiny part of the population, okay? And that's across the board, okay? And because it is actually through indigenous identity and biological reality, continuity of this, that we know. We just know who we are physically on this earth. And suffice it to say, okay, that if indigenous identity, let me just say something, okay, before I go on. Let me give you an example of the power of culture, the unifying power of culture. The Asian continent has many, many, many different cultures, hundreds of different cultures, cultural identities, people. But the Asian continent has a powerful indigenous identity, unifying indigenous identity. And the reason, it is because of this that I can say with complete confidence as a Indigenous Asian woman, okay, that you can pick any person off the Asian continent from any country, okay? I don't care what it is. More than 9 times out of 10, if you told them that it was offensive to accept the reality that women are the life bringers, and so we must say pregnant people, I can say it is because of the unifying force of Indigenous identity, okay, and values, that I can say with absolute confidence that more than 9 times out of 10, that person that you picked will tell you to get the fuck out. They will tell you to get the fuck out. And let me tell you the reason for this. Okay? Indigenous identity and cultural, religious identity is ancient, and it's powerful. It has survived 2 million years of human history. And I can tell you one thing, not because primarily people have valued and prioritized feelings and personal preferences and kind of an obsession with one's identity and demanding that others make you feel comfortable with that, okay? The reason why humanity has moved forward is because Indigenous people, Indigenous identity, Indigenous values mainly prioritize 3 things. One is the soul, which is directly in service to natural law that we did not create. Okay, it is an understanding that we did not create natural law. We did not create our physical coil on this earth. We exist and we are born as a result of divine force, okay, divine will. And this is, way before Christianity, guys, way before European Christianity. And I can tell you this because of my Asian culture, my Asian roots, okay? The soul is in service to natural law. It is in service to unconditional love, and springing from that, Indigenous values are rooted in the sanctity of the biological family, and then because of that, from that, the sanctity and importance of lineage, okay? If one were just to step out of the political rah-rah for 2 seconds, okay, and sort of either rise above or more, I tend to get below the smog, okay? I'll soar above the smog, but I'll many times just get below the smog where the air is also clearer too. That this just makes logical sense, okay? Prioritizing the will of the soul, which is in service to the one love, unconditional love, and natural law, okay? and the sanctity of the family, the biological family, and from that lineage. It just makes logical sense that those three values make up the incredible power of Indigenous identity. Okay? In fact, when you study empires, you study history, okay, you study ancient history all the way up to modern history and the present day, the cultures that became so successful and started to become led around by the ego, because that's what happens a lot of times with material success. Okay, that it is an ancient understanding. Okay, yes, biblically, but even before that it was through the story of the first woman and her capture and her journey through and out of the wake of that capture, and finally to her own divinity again. It is an ancient trap, okay, that humans fall into, that we allow the ego, we allow egoic forces that are created through the energy of the ego of those that have passed, okay, and those that still live egoic lives. Okay, it is the ancient pattern of the ego to trick us into thinking that the value lies in the trivial. The value lies in the temporary. Now, feelings are temporary, okay? That's the reason why most people don't have any issue with their physical coil or their physical existence, because feelings are temporary. Feelings are important, but they should not run our lives. You know, they should be in service to a deeper wisdom that since ancient times, since the beginning of time, okay, that since time out of mind, the religious and spiritual ritual and understanding that there is a force that is us, yet greater than us, that call it the soul, call it whatever you want, okay? Call it divinity, call it God, call it whatever you want. You know, like there's a wisdom that is greater than us, that we did not create. We came from, okay? And the ego, it is an ancient trap that humans fall into, that believe the ego and its need to value the trivial, the temporary, the right now, seeing itself as a isolated island of feelings and preferences and stuff and opinions, and sort of playing with those things in the moment, rather than the soul understanding, which is that of the human being being a gateway to the past, to the ancestors, and to the future. And so the soul deeply cares about the present and reaches deep into the past to root itself in the ancestors, and therefore reaches deep into the future. It is far seeing. It is far seeing. the corruption of the word indigenous is really important to talk about, because it doesn't make any logical sense. And this illogic, this inanity, okay, is destroying us. Empires, as I was saying, empires, including Western Empire now, that is prioritizing the temporary, okay, prioritizing the fluid. This word fluid constantly being used. Okay, fluid. Cool. Yeah, fluid. Yeah, water is fluid. Yes. True. This is true. But water doesn't identify as anything but water. Okay? It can become ice, but it's still water. Okay? It can become vapor, but it's still water. Okay? Water is water. Water is life. Okay? And it's not going to say, oh, I feel like acting like a beaver, so I'm going to be a beaver now. This doesn't make any sense. Okay, we live in a time which has happened time after time throughout history, that the ego now has taken over again, and it is a signal to us as a humanity that, okay, how have we fallen into that trap again, in which we hold so much value in the temporary, and we dismiss the life, death, rebirth nature that is in the original sacred feminine, okay? And we have allowed our egos to dismiss and sever ourselves from the indigenous spirit that lives in Ava. And that's what I'm here to come talk about to people, is that Ava, the first mother, the indigenous woman, okay, is the goddess personified, and she is ready to walk the earth, to hold her children's hands, to bring merciful death to that which needs to die. Okay, these philosophies that prioritize, that glorify the temporary, instead of the temporary being just that, temporary. They're wonderful and they're good in the moment, or not, depending on what they are, right? But they're temporary. And they understand that there's a time for life, there's a time for death, and there's a time for rebirth. And bringing that, and then through that work, giving rebirth to the sacred masculine. Okay, certainly we can see in Western. Certainly, we can see in Western culture and Western customs, in Western thought systems, okay, political systems, there needs to be a rebirth of the masculine, absolutely. And this is happening now through the feminine, through the sacred and revival of the true indigenous spirit. Once again, the the true identity of the indigenous spirit survives and survived because of three foundational things. And they just make logical sense. All you have to do is quiet your mind and not prioritize your feelings for a minute. Okay? It's not that they're not important. It's just they're not a priority at all times. There's no need to force or make others, so make others privy or sanctimonious of your feelings. Okay, just set them aside for a moment. Okay, it just makes logical sense that, and I'm going to use my continent, my people, my cultural identity as an example. My people have survived throughout the ages crimes against each other, crimes from the Western world, both psychological and physical, that, for example, is communist regimes, okay, that came out of the West, the philosophies that came out of the West. It survived the unspeakable, okay? And the reason for this is because of the deep and ancient and soulful values of the original Indigenous spirit, okay? And that is to prioritize, to value the soul and the soul's parent, the soul's essence, that is unconditional love and natural law. 2, out of that, the biological family. Okay? Giving children, human beings, what they need, which is a context. If you don't know where you come from, if you don't know, for better or for worse, who your father is, where you come from, what culture you come from, then that goes into lineage. If you don't know this, then you are lost. If then you don't know this, then you're floating. You're floating, which now we can see is happening to Western people, and has been happening to Western people for a very long time. And the hippie culture did not just open up. The hippie culture ended up, the baby boomer culture, tradition is to devalue culture, cultural identity, religious identity, for better or for worse. And that just is what it is. And then lineage. So that comes straight out of the sanctity of the biological family, natural law, and unconditional love. Just to reflect on that, putting your feelings aside, putting your political opinions aside, put it all aside. It's just logical. It's logical to the heart. It's logical to the soul. It's logical to all of it. To the physical, our physical coil, our physical existence, our ancient history, both natural and in the natural world, and then human existence, which is also natural, but certainly has very unnatural aspects, right? So healing the understanding of the ancient Indigenous is the work of the first woman, the first mother, Ava, the great scarred woman, the holy, dangerous woman.